Michael, we adore you, and we're glad you're here on a Friday. And it is a Friday that has capped a very eventful week, which caps a very eventful few weeks. So,
Yeah.
Michael Shure, you are steeped in so much knowledge when it comes to politics, but even you must be challenged to square what's happening now. You have a president who has, in some ways, turned over a lot of administrative detail, and that detail has involved decapitating the U.S. government, essentially. He's turned it over to the richest man in the world, who goes on with a kind of co-press conference from the Oval Office this week, press conference where his kid is with him. Elon Musk brought his child with him.
Yeah.
And there's just, I would say, and you may think, oh, that's charming, that's the way it should be, not you personally, but one may think that. And or you may say this flies in the face of decorum and some of the formality and sort of the august nature of the Oval Office. In any case, more to the substance of what they're doing, there really is a dismantling of the structure of the federal government. Could you speak to what's happening?
Yeah, yes and no. I don't think any of us can really speak to it because there is no precedent for it. As a matter of fact, I had a member of Congress text me, I guess it was over last weekend. He's not someone I know very well. I haven't covered him a lot, but I guess I did a couple of stories that he was pretty involved in. He's a Democrat, and he wrote to me and he said, I'm getting advice from everybody about how we talk to people because we are really trying, and we've never seen chaos like this. And I get it. I appreciated the outreach, and I said I need a week or so to figure out, because it's really the question you just asked, Mark. How do you make heads or tails of this? How do you have this runaway party being led by a runaway engineer, and who's got the richest man in the world using the Oval Office as a playroom, and just sitting there with soliloquy and monologue? And so I don't think people can be faulted for not knowing exactly what to make of it just yet. I think that it can't endure on either end, right? We're in the first 100 days of a presidency, and people are trying to figure this out. I'm not always an incrementalist, but I don't think you can just snap back at everything and think you're going to solve the problem. He has both houses of Congress. The courts have been instrumental in slowing things down. They can only do so much, and it'll be the test of the higher courts for things that make it to the higher courts. But there's going to be a sense of outrage at some point. And I think when all the dust settles and you start seeing not just the bluster, but you actually start seeing some of these things happen, it will be easier to respond to it. It's easy to respond to RFK Jr. being named HHS and then confirmed yesterday for Secretary of Health and Human Services, knowing his past, knowing what he brings to it, knowing his rhetoric. However, once he is the head and things start happening and you can react to things that are actually happening, it will make a big difference in the responsive rhetoric, I believe.
Well, one of the things we actually saw happen was that Musk, and this happened even prior to this week. I mean, this week we've kind of seen the aftermath and some of the outrage and some of the disgust and surprise. We saw Elon Musk get right into the U.S. Treasury. Now, he did it with approval from Besant, is it?
Besant.
Yeah, and he does it with these 19 to 26-year-old guys who are coming from a tech background with him. They'd worked for his various companies in various capacities, and they are going through the data that's associated with what checks are cut and what Americans get what organizations get what, et cetera. I mentioned this for a reason. I mean, we did touch on this, I think, in our conversation last week, but the point to mention it this week is for a guy in Elon Musk who is so committed to trying to increase America's efficiency at the governmental level, he brought no accountants. He brought no one who with any kind of managerial or administrative history. He brought young people who have very little history of any kind, except for the fact that they were phenoms, I think, at his companies. And he moved into government computers and took all that information. We're not really sure how it's going to be used. left a back door for there to be, it's been reported, for there to be a continuous monitoring of what's going on with the federal government, the Treasury level, and more to the point, pursued a decapitation of the U.S. government based on it's unclear what. I mean, in other words, for all of the stuff about increasing efficiency, he has just taken a huge axe to government without any sort of consideration about what you're cutting. It's an across-the-board cut. So from an outsider looking in, I don't see any sort of considered strategy here. I just see a recklessness.
I do too, and I think it's an intentional chaos that they're sowing here, so that you look one way and something that you find outrageous is happening, and while you're looking away, six other outrageous things are happening on the other side and straight ahead, and something else has happened behind you, and then someone disavowed something that is clearly true, and so the sort of flood the zone offense that this administration is doing has created a chaos that is efficient because they have the levers of power. How that endures, we don't know. And I don't mean to suggest, oh, just be calm, things will work out. I don't feel that way at all. But I don't think that this is necessarily the best time to respond. It's the best time to kind of organize a response. But what I mean is that it's so chaotic now that it cannot remain this chaotic. And if it does, then that will be a disservice, I think, to the people who are sowing the chaos now. I don't think that can sustain. Uh, and what the solutions are, to me, are not clear yet. I think that people have to find reasonable people, and I don't, when you talk about, oh, there are no reasonable Republicans, I hear you, because they're all confirming these really crazy nominees to some of these spots. And I'm not saying the people are necessarily crazy, though some are. I think that there are people who could do these jobs who would hew to the same belief system that Trump has and that the people that brought him there have, without bringing the sort of craziness and agenda to the jobs that they have, and be people that a lot of this audience and would really not like at all, but at least be reasonable people. I think Marco Rubio is an example of that as Secretary of State. Most people, he won 99 to nothing in that confirmation, because Democrats know that, yeah, there are going to be some people that we disagree with fundamentally and personally, on every level, but they're the types of people that presidents of the other party put in charge of a department. And that's not happening here. But once that's over with, they're going to start doing things. And that's what has to be kept in check. And I think relying on the courts is important, because the courts do slow things down and allow people on the other side to write about it, to talk about it, and to create legislative blocks to whatever it is that's trying to be put in place.
And that's interesting, because it seems as though, as you suggested, they've just really been absorbed into MAGA land, and no one wants to push back on this president. And there's good reason. I mean, it's not a pure politics, although I think there's a big political part of it. But I think it's also fear. I mean, wouldn't you say that there is a dash of that in a big way?
There is some fear. There's no question, but it's also the constancy of it, right? I mean, so today, or whenever it was in Munich time, when Vice President Vance addressed the gathered in Munich for the economic conference, and he talked in ways that we haven't heard a vice president talk, that gets pushed aside, because now we're talking about Kash Patel clearing a committee and going on to confirmation next week, and whether or not they're going to be able to do anything about it, and it doesn't look like they're going to be able to do anything about it. And then you have Mayor Adams and that quid pro quo going on in New York, and so there are all these distractions that they're putting in place along the way that makes it impossible necessarily to do that. So I think that relying on the courts, even the lower courts and the middle rung courts, is not bad strategy, only because they slow things down. Not that it's going to change what's happening in the Oval Office or on Capitol Hill, but only because it's going to buy time, and buying time is important for the opponents of this administration.
This from Grenache says, in D.C., Senator Schumer needs to be replaced. He's too ineffective and lacks leadership skills. Also, Jeffries needs to push harder, Congressman Jeffries, and speak louder. This is kind of what you were talking about first, but with a little more of a question, which I'll ask you. That is to say, what to say, what to do. It's a little
Yeah.
hard, and then who. This is the part that I think might just put a sharper edge on it. Who really is the standout voice for the Democrats? I think they're still looking. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think they're finding that. I think they are. But Grenache, I think that was the name of the person who just wrote in.
Right.
I think that makes a good point. In that, when you look at, and we may have talked about this last week. I've talked about it certainly in other places this past week, but I think Kim and I talked about it last week. When you look at Chuck Schumer, right? I think he's actually a good leader. I think that he's good at the job of majority leader. I don't know that he's the right person for minority leader. I don't know if he's, I don't know that you want an older man who's peering over reading glasses while he stands at a lectern to be the voice of a party that is really trying to revolt against what is happening on the other side. You've heard loud voices. You've heard Chris Murphy of Connecticut, Brian Schatz of Hawaii. You've heard people speaking clearly and loudly. It would be great, I think, for Democrats to have one of those voices as their leader. That said, there are hoops that have to be gone through. The first of which is Chuck Schumer has to say, I don't want to be leader anymore. I'm stepping down from leadership, or I'm not going to run in 26. I'm stepping down from leadership on July 1, giving my party a chance to do that. I think that it just takes a little while for that voice to be found. And that voice has to be a voice that is reasonable to the other side. Meaning, you talked about fear. It's not even fear. It's you're trying to appeal to reasonableness on the other side, because that's going to be your only avenue until you win the House back, if you can do such a thing. That's going to be your only avenue to making headway here. So it cannot be one of the very divisive people on the far left of the party. And they don't have a big voice in the Senate anyway, but in the House certainly they do. And I think Hakeem Jeffries, to her point or his point, is truly it's on him to actually speak louder. But again, I think he's part of. I think they're working on this. I have that confidence. I don't know that it's going to work because Democrats mess up a lot, but I do think that they're coming up with a way to react to things when they come across their desk legislatively.
Mike in Willow Glen says, you lost me at reasonable.
Yeah, no, I know. I get that, right? I would be yelling at me for saying that too, in a way. But what in finding a new leader for your party, when you're going up against, smooth talking, handsome, tall John Thune in the Senate, you've got to have somebody who can be up to the game there. It has to be a man or a woman who can appeal to Republicans who are not in lockstep with MAGA, who may be in bluer states or purple states, and looking to hold on to their seat in 26 or 28. So yeah, I get why that sounds ridiculous, reasonable, but they're in the Senate. They do make relationships, and there are certain Republican senators who will not listen to certain Democratic senators, and I think that would change with a change in leadership there. But again, there's so much has to happen. It's a little bit of fantasy land. Chuck Schumer is the minority leader to the Senate. He's not going anywhere. When you have power, as we saw with President Biden and others, it's tough to relinquish that power.
Yeah, boy, that's so well put and so well pointed out. I wonder about something as I've been watching some of the pushback from various legislators, congresspeople, senators. I mean, I was watching a lot of Senator Whitehouse, for example, who is he's always been good at calling out the dark money that infests the courts.
Yeah. He's a former U.S. attorney.
Yeah, and he's so good at making a case. He's also very good with media. I wanted to ask you, this is really a Michael Shure type question. How come he's never been talked about in the presidential conversation?
First of all, I don't know that he hasn't. He's been talked about as a vice president before. I think he was one of the people that Hillary Clinton was considering when she settled on Senator Kaine. But you have to want to run. You have to, people who don't run have very many reasons for not running. Yeah, there could be personal reasons that we don't know about. There could be that he doesn't want to be president of the United States. That's the least likely to believe. But running a national campaign is a tough thing. You also have to look at the field and where he raises his money. So each time he would have to be going for dollars that somebody else might be claiming. I think when John Kerry ran in 2004, his name was even talked about a little bit then, and then it kind of faded. And I don't know why. I don't know why Chris Murphy's name hasn't come up, but there are reasons that we don't know about. And it could just simply be that they don't have the fundraising networks, and they're not as much party people as they are, about their seats. And that's normal. That happens a lot.
The elimination of so much of government is something that oddly polls pretty well with the public, because the public, it all depends how the question is asked, of course, but if the public is asked, do you want to see, waste, fraud, and abuse? That's the big three. Trump has used that, and Musk has used it, and it's a waste, fraud, and who doesn't want to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse? And if you see an overgrown government as personifying waste, fraud, and abuse, then you don't get your hackles up as much about sort of the aggressive manner in which they are pursuing getting rid of people and getting rid of government organizations and departments. Now, they're not just getting rid of fraud, waste, and abuse, as we've talked about and detailed on the show. They are just getting rid of everything, baby and bathwater. And Musk is getting rid of those agencies that have given him a hard time. FAA, EPA.
Yeah.
It's really a personal grievance thing for him.
Of course it is. And that's why, you say waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, fraud and abuse, fine. Waste is subjective, right? I mean, what you may think is waste is not what somebody else would think is waste, and vice versa. So if you're just allowing an autocrat to be the arbiter of what is waste, then you're going to get what we're seeing now from Musk. And that is really disturbing. But the Democrats have to message better. And it's easy to say, oh, they will. But they haven't, right? And so until they do, they have to do better. It's not like they're not working on it. It's not like they're not trying to formulate. I liken it a little bit to the fires here in California, especially in Los Angeles, where people were excoriating the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, for her response to the fire. It's not like Karen Bass didn't want to respond better, but everything happened at once, right? And so judge Karen Bass in a year, maybe, when you see how the city has come back, see if everything that was promised was happening. It's not like she doesn't want to make the city better, but it happened in such a tsunami kind of way in Los Angeles. Well, the same thing is happening, if you want to use that analog, in Washington now. Everything is happening so quickly. It's all happening at once. There's nothing any elected Democrat in Washington can do to change that right this second. But what they can do is work really damn hard to try and change that as it starts, where the rubber meets the road, I guess, where this stuff starts coming across the committees in the House and Senate, when legislation has to be passed and voted on, when votes have to be whipped and counted in the House and in the Senate. That's where they can do some of the messaging they need to do, but they have to work on it now, because their track record is just abhorrent at doing that.
Yeah, the Democrats just seem to be, and maybe it's this big tent aspect to their party, but it seems as though the kind of coherent strategy, this is a toxic coherent strategy that the Republicans have adopted, this MAGA strategy, I think. Yeah. But the coherent strategy, the coherence is still something that the Democrats are searching for,
They are, and what they're searching for it against incoherence, which is bizarre, because what's coming at us is incoherent and chaotic, as I said. And so it's hard to become coherent when you haven't been, especially in the face of incoherence. So I think that they're gonna have to figure it out, and it's really up to them, and it's an opportunity, right? I think when Roe v. Wade was overturned, it was terrible news for people in the pro-choice community, but it was an opportunity to educate and to push and to organize. And what did it do? It had good electoral results, and in midterm elections and thereafter, not in the presidential, because it was, it didn't become the issue that it was because perhaps of the 6-3 court, and Trump was kind of wishy-washy on the issue when he was running. But this is that kind of opportunity. From something horrible, you have to be able to make something good, and if you can't, then shame on you.
I have also, to be fair, seen the Democrats push back and try to message. I think the media doesn't really give them much oxygen, maybe for some of the reasons that you've just described, which is that there is so much chaos to cover. It is Bannon's plan to flood the zone that has been so very successful that you don't hear the Sheldon Whitehouses of the world. You don't hear so many of these Democrats who speak articulately about what's happening. For example, I mean, that if Joe Biden had George Soros there in the Oval Office, and they were, Soros was handling the press, and Soros had his kid there, and I mean, it would be wall to wall on media that how can this person do this? He wasn't elected. How he's been given so much responsibility. He's just a rich guy who's bought, exactly.
And that's where the Democrats and the left are at a distinct disadvantage. They don't have the media. And I people will laugh and say, "What do you mean they don't have the media? Media is so liberal; it's all liberal elites." It's not what I'm talking about. There's a media infrastructure in Trump world that operates and forgives, and will challenge any other narrative other than the one he has, whether it's OAN, Newsmax, Fox, but it also exists in streaming. It exists in people who subscribe to things like Breitbart and the Daily Caller. They're constantly going and talking about how whatever Trump is saying is right, and the Democratic message is drowned out because they don't have that sustaining media, and that's choice media, meaning if you want to listen to liberal or progressive radio on Sirius, if you want to only watch MSNBC, if you only go to liberal outlets, there just isn't a loud enough voice. The right voice is very hard, and they always agree, and agreeing is so powerful. That's why Rush Limbaugh's fans were called ditto heads, right? Can you imagine anything more insulting for a progressive or a liberal to be called a ditto head? No, but it was a badge of honor for the people who listened to Rush, and we're dealing with ditto heads again now.
That's such a great call. This is from teacher Lori. MAGA is being extreme, so I think we need to start using their successful tactics and have the most extreme people speaking out for our side. Don't know Senate, but House members Jasmine Crockett and AOC.
I mean, I think that's a valid. I don't agree with it, but I see why teacher Lori says that. I don't agree with it just philosophically because I don't think. I think their extreme is more powerful than our extreme within their own party. But I see why. And extreme is a terrible word because that implies
nobody wants extreme.
Nobody wants extreme, but it's also. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Jasmine Crockett are not extremists.
That's true.
They're passionate, and so. But what I'm saying is their voices are not as loud within the caucus halls that matter in Congress as the voices of the extreme right are, and I think that. So I think that would not be a good way to go into battle against them. But I would totally, I would never say that anyone was out of their mind for thinking that. It's a sound philosophy. It's just not one that I would go with, but I see why people would. And it's maybe worth the risk because nothing else is working. But that didn't work either. I mean, Bernie Sanders, for all the love he garnered, he lost a couple of times and he lost badly. And I think the Democrats are wanting to present something, and maybe he should have won, and maybe that would have changed this conversation, made teacher Lori G right and all of that. But I think in approaching the extreme on the other side, I think an appeal to reasonableness is probably a better way to go. But I would listen all day to any ideas.
I mean, Bernie Sanders, just because you mentioned him, I think he may be one of the best spokespeople for, a reasoned pushback on what's happening in government. I mean, it literally may be the top of the game,
Yeah.
But as you say, it wasn't enough to to win it. We could talk about what went into that election that he lost. Kyle says the Dems gaslit us about Joe having dementia, soft cooed him out of office, and installed an extremely unelectable candidate. I mean, this is kind of like the how we got here situation.
Yeah.
I don't know. You may want to comment.
Look, soft cooed him. He got out too late, but he got out, which I think deserves some commendation because it's tough to leave the presidency. But I didn't think there was another path for him, and I was calling for him and expecting him to leave much earlier than he did. I didn't think he would run. I thought the Thanksgiving before the election he would have gotten out. That said, when we see what the results were, I don't think this race was lost because Kamala Harris was the nominee. I think this race would have been lost to virtually anybody. I don't know who the Democrat was that would have excited enough voters to keep those MAGA people and those MAGA voices in some of these states home. Again, that's a defeatist attitude, but if you're going to look back and say that the Dems lost because Biden stayed in too late, I can look back and say I don't think anybody could have beaten them, but I'm not sure. And certainly that there needed to have been a better race, a race for the nomination. Somebody should have challenged Joe Biden earlier too if he wasn't going out. Somebody of substance should have. So you could have had we've talked about this before here, but somebody like Ted Kennedy challenging President Carter in 1980. But that person would have to be uniquely positioned to raise a lot of money in a race against a sitting president.
You had an angry electorate. You had I think a generational candidate. I mean, in Donald Trump, and one that, as you suggested, had a coalition of these followers, the MAGA Nation, and very, very tough to fight against that momentum. Kash Patel says Lawrence is the most dangerous threat to our liberty. That may be true.
I think it is. I mean, I think of all the people that I was hoping wouldn't get confirmed, from Hegseth to Gabbard to Kennedy to Patel. I agree with Lawrence. I think Kash Patel is the most dangerous because he comes in with an agenda unlike any of the others. He's a vindictive voice for the president who's going to go after anybody who he perceives as an enemy. He comes in with a laundry list of things he wants to do to dismantle law enforcement in this country and make it favorable to somebody that has broken the law. So I agree. He would be, if I had one. Somebody asked me if I had one vote against any Trump nominee, it would have been Kash Patel for sure.
I 100% agree with that. Now I want to just quickly address what's happening with NATO, and maybe you have a thought about how the world is being reconfigured in this short time by this new Trump administration and their disposition toward our allies and to the NATO alliance.
Yeah, rhetoric is a heavy thing. So let's see what happens. I mean, Zelensky is saying that there is no peace without conversation. He's not going to allow this NATO conversation to happen because he just leaves himself vulnerable again. So I don't see how. I don't think we know enough yet, but NATO also has to speak up, right? I mean, this can't just be first of all, Trump and Putin want to make it just Trump and Putin and allow Zelensky in the room a little bit on what should happen should there be peace in between Russia and Ukraine. But NATO has to have a voice there, and certainly Ukraine does, or else none of this is going to work. So I think NATO is just another look. The international organizations are something that Donald Trump cannot stand. From the UN, where they don't even have a UN representative there because they're playing politics with Elise Stefanik, who they might not want out of the house. So they might just leave it open there at the UN and not have an ambassador to the United Nations so that Mike Johnson can keep his already very slim majority intact. So and what did he do with the Paris Climate Accords? Nothing. And then NATO, he wants to stand in the way of NATO. So he, America first, that turn of phrase that he likes so much, and the sort of cheapened mottos that he uses, that's what he sees in NATO. And I think that he doesn't really care enough about NATO. He just wants to be the person who came in and got Putin to stop bombing, and that's what he would take home to the dinner table.
Yeah, it's just odd, though, that that coexists, the ending of Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. And again, I mean, I get it. You can end it by surrendering.
Right, right.
But the ending of the war in Ukraine, again, in air quotes, that coexists with these very aggressive, almost militaristic flexes toward Greenland, toward Canada, toward Mexico. It's a weird thing from this guy who was supposed to be, again, this peacenik that as he was pitched by people I know on the right. Oh my God, he's going to get us. He's anti-war. I mean,
By the
all
way,
candidates. Yeah, go
Mark,
ahead.
so many of the supporters of Donald Trump liked him because he was anti-war, because he
Right.
didn't want
That's
wars.
what I'm saying. Yeah.
And so what do? If you don't want to go in with your military, you take land that is absurd, like Greenland and Panama Canal. I mean, it's somebody who has fascist ideas, but there's no land to conquer. So you look at Canada and Greenland and the Panama Canal, and you think that's going to be where we put our flag up, and we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico. So I don't know. I think this is all, again, part of the chaos. Donald Trump came in saying build a wall and doing so many of the things he said he would do and didn't get them done. Again, he's got a little more power than he had the first time. But I also think that the weakening power of the lame duck nature of his presidency that will kick in at a certain point, and the 2026 midterms are going to change that a little bit. I know that.
I mean, he seems. I mean, you're so right that in a traditional kind of expectation politically, you'd think that would happen with the lame duck presidency. We'll see. I mean, he seems to have completely cowed this party.
No, he does. I mean, he does until he doesn't, right? Like everybody else. Reagan lost the party too for a little while. And so I agree. I'm wrong until I'm right, and I may be wrong. We've all been so wrong about Trump and predicting Trump and what happens with him. So many of us have been anyway. There's some people that have been right. But I've been one of the wrong ones. I think though that some of the general sort of rhythms of the presidency, even in his first term, took hold. And I think that's going to take hold a little bit in this presidency too, in this administration. But the Democrats are going to have to find a way to message it and to speak loudly and passionately and have a plan that they're pushing. The worst thing to do is to oppose without having a better solution. The Democrats have to be able to have that, and then they also have to be able to articulate it.
I also think we have to be honest about the electorate in America and how sort of disinterested on some level they might be. I think they respond to some of these flexes. I couldn't believe he mentioned manifest destiny in talking about increasing the reach of America across the globe. And manifest destiny I associated with some of the most heinous acts of expansionism in the history of this country, from driving the Native Americans to slaughter, to these ambitious takeovers and illegal takeovers of land. So I was astounded that he mentioned it. By the way, I was astounded that he even knew the term.
Yeah, well, that's true too. Yeah, I mean, somebody said it to him, and he once looked it up and probably liked it and reset it. The way he hangs William McKinley's portrait in the Oval Office, he doesn't know who William McKinley was. I mean, somebody told him about it and said, turn of the century. This is industrial revolution. Yeah, that's what we are. The power of business in America, and that was appealing to him. And it might have been Musk who said it, and then he looked it up and said, "Oh yeah, he probably Googled it."
I love shooting the breeze with you here. We must wrap, but I want you to know that you have a lot of love in the chat. You adore Michael Shure, but you don't adore him enough to send him a mug, says Carol Ford.
Thank you, Carol.
Judy says Michael Shure should have had a mug a long time ago for guest hosting the Mark Thompson Show.
They do this to me all the time. I don't know what the hell they do it for.
Yeah, they really have. He has been kicked around.
We didn't do today, and I don't know if we have 48 seconds.
Has Mr. Shure received his mug yet? That's Kurt. I know you want to do your. You want to do your 48 seconds?
There you go.
Sports?
And Albert already has the graphic in place.
All right, go for it. Go for it. 48
all
seconds.
All
right.
So the Four Nations tournament of hockey is happening. U.S., Canada, Sweden, and Finland. Canada beat Sweden in overtime. The U.S. Crushed Finland. It's a timeout from the NHL. It's great because it's all these guys who play together all the time, the best players in the world, playing against each other, having a good time, laughing but taking it seriously. Really, really fun. So I suggest you take a look at that. It's a different kind of competition, and the number of people in Canada when they played the national anthem of the United States that are booing is really disappointing. But they're booing because of what the president of the United States has said about Canada, not because they don't like America. And it's an amazing thing to have the announcer in Montreal say, "Hey, just be respectful of the national anthem." And here are the national anthem singers. Guy comes out, starts "Oh Say Can You See," and then a rain of boos. Not because of the country and not because of sportsmanship, because they're really pissed at Donald Trump for saying the things he said about their country. Interesting.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is interesting. 48 seconds of sports with a little bit of international politics involved.
And happy
Michael,
Valentine's Day, everybody.
A mug you shall have soon.
Okay.
Michael Shure, everybody.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.